Hey, RetconRaider here, and welcome back to another video showcasing elements of Phoenix Point, the hot new tactical strategy game coming from Julian Gollop and Snapshot Games in late 2018. So far I've talked about the many mutants you might face in the final game, the mysteries of the Pandora virus, and those pesky NPC factions, but today I thought I'd focus on something I think we're all interested in learning about. So let's talk about the tactical combat layer of the game. Obviously, one of the main features of Phoenix Point is going to be the turn-based tactical combat, with a focus on squad-level battles. There are plenty of other elements to the game, of course, such as the global strategy layer, the interfaction diplomacy, and the simulationist aspects of handling research, development, and supply logistics, but I think it's safe to say that over half our actual time in the game will be spent shooting at things. Now, I have to warn you, this is an aspect of the game that the developers are still actively prototyping, so things could very well end up changing before the game actually launches. But for now, let's take a look at everything Snapshot Games has told us about the turn-based combat system. Let's start off with the biggest question, and the one that they've spent the most time addressing. What's the deal with the action system? Well, Julian Gollop himself has acknowledged that this is a contentious subject. You see, the original XCOM titles used what is known as the time units system. It provided a remarkable amount of granularity, allowing a player to determine exactly how much, or how little, a soldier could accomplish in a single turn, and it was influenced by several factors such as your soldier's current health or encumbrance. Unfortunately, that kind of attention to detail does come with a cost, in this case a much slower overall pace to the game, especially in larger battles. In comparison, the newer XCOM titles from Firaxis use a streamlined two-action system that appears to have been inspired by modern role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons. In this system, the player has two action points, which he can spend to move, attack, or take special actions. This system is significantly simpler, but also far more intuitive, and helps to keep the game moving along at a much swifter pace. Unfortunately, the simplicity is also its biggest drawback, making it difficult for a player to quickly adapt to changing circumstances on the virtual battlefield. With all that in mind, Phoenix Point will be making use of a hybrid system. On its face, it appears to be a two-action system similar to the one presented in the newer Firaxis-made XCOM titles. But the player will be given the opportunity to react when encountering something in the middle of their turn. For example, if an enemy is spotted while a soldier is taking a movement action, their current movement action will immediately be halted, and the player will be able to respond to this new circumstance, usually by choosing to either alter their originally planned movement or by immediately making an attack action. This could theoretically happen multiple times in a single turn, meaning that a character could rush out around a blind corner, spot an enemy, alter their action to move to cover, spot another enemy once he's reached that cover, and then react by firing at the easier of the two targets. In addition, the player will actually have the option to take more than two actions if they choose to do so. This is done through the use of Phoenix Point's proposed willpower system. Willpower is an attribute that has been present in all of the previous mainstream XCOM titles. In the past, it's been used to calculate soldier morale, as well as proficiency with psionic powers, but it usually operated in a passive capacity. In Phoenix Point, however, it appears that Julian Gollop wants the willpower attribute to play a more active role in battle. A soldier's willpower will grant them a number of will points during battle, which they can spend in a variety of ways. The most basic use for these will points is to take extra actions during a turn, but they will also be used to fuel special abilities gained through class training, research, or special pieces of equipment. As combat progresses, a soldier will gain and lose will points based on the ebb and flow of battle, spending points as the situation demands it, and regaining points as a reward when accomplishing certain tasks, such as killing foes, achieving mission goals, spending a turn resting, or being rallied by a nearby leader. However, if a soldier's willpower begins to drop, which can happen as the result of injury or witnessing the death of an ally, then their maximum number of will points will also decrease. A soldier can actually end up with a negative number of will points, and if this happens, then the soldier will likely end up panicking, and may very well end up going insane. Although they haven't nailed down the specifics yet, they currently plan on representing insanity as a series of afflictions that a soldier might suffer from after a particularly traumatic experience. These afflictions will operate like negative passive abilities, hindering a soldier's performance until they're properly treated. Aside from the two-action system, the action interrupt system, and the will point system, there are also plans to add further reactivity with other basic combat mechanics, such as an overwatch system and a return fire system. Unfortunately, we don't yet know exactly how those systems are going to be implemented. Beyond that, one of the more heavily promoted features of the tactical combat is the hit location system. As shown in some of the earliest teaser images from last year, the player will be able to target individual body parts on their foes, similar to the VAT system from the Fallout franchise. This will allow a player to disable individual limbs, building their strategies around targeting more vulnerable parts of their foes, while also hindering them with crippling injuries. But it works both ways, and the player's soldiers will also suffer damage to individual body parts during combat. If a soldier suffers too much damage to a single part of their body, it will end up being disabled, or possibly even permanently crippled. Though Gollop has stated that such crippling injuries may be treatable with advanced prosthetics or dangerous mutations. This can be mitigated to an extent with the multi-part body armor system, which will allow the player to mix and match different pieces of armor to provide varying levels of defense to different parts of their body. This will also play into the directional cover system. On its face, the cover system in Phoenix Point will be the basic 4-directional cover system seen in the more recent XCOM titles. However, Snapshot Games is currently working to refine the system so that it will work well with their hit location system, meaning it won't just be important to take cover, but also to know which parts of your body that cover will actually protect. But of course, that cover won't help you much if it gets destroyed, and that brings us to procedural, destructible terrain. Julian Gollop has made it clear from the get-go that he wants to feature a procedural or semi-procedural map system, similar to the one seen in most of the past XCOM games. Some maps will be at least partially handcrafted, but he wants there to always be an element of randomness to them. And anything that appears on a map will theoretically be destructible. While some things will certainly be easier to destroy than others, Gollop has stated that he wants the player to be able to destroy anything that they come across, and he has confirmed that the game will include a free aim system that will allow the player to specifically target pieces of terrain during combat. Another common question about the tactical combat layer of the games is about squad size. In the original XCOM games, the player could end up fielding squads of over a dozen soldiers at a time, while the newer games restricted the player to a much more modest squad size of just 4 to 6 soldiers at once. Snapshot Games is aiming for somewhere between those two extremes, stating that the player will be able to field squads of between 4 and 16 soldiers during most missions, possibly further supplemented by support drones. The main limiting factor will be the size of your available dropships as well as the availability of healthy, combat-ready recruits. In the early game, the player will be limited by the small carrying capacity of their salvaged helicopter, but later in the game they will have access to larger dropships designed to carry significantly more passengers, and possibly even ground vehicles as well, assuming that stretch goal is unlocked. Likewise, soldiers in Phoenix Point will be a bit hardier than they are in the XCOM games, more likely to suffer permanent injuries or mental traumas than outright death if they fall in combat. But if they do die, they'll be harder to replace. In a recent interview with RPG Codex, Julian Gollop stated that smaller squads will gain bonuses to the experience they gain during missions. Smaller squads may also find it easier to take advantage of the stealth system, which Snapshot Games is still actively designing. They've stated that the detection ranges will be based on characters' perception attributes modified by equipment, abilities, and mutations. Much like in XCOM 2, using a weapon will generally blow your cover, but there will be an assortment of stealth-based weapons that will allow you to circumvent this restriction, such as the crossbows shown in this concept art. Enemies will also make use of stealth, due in part to the way the microbial mist works. Mist produced by enemy bosses such as the Crab Queen and the Tiddler will provide cover for surrounding units, and some mutants will presumably make better use of this cover than others. In addition, any of your soldiers who steps into the microbial mist will automatically be detected by all nearby mutants, no matter how well hidden they may have been. Another aspect of the combat system that hasn't really been touched on much is what the developers are referring to as tactical cards. These cards are usually the result of special research projects and represent special battlefield abilities. In interviews, Julian Gollop has stated that these cards may do things like granting buffs, revealing the location of enemies or lootable resources, calling in an emergency evacuation for your soldiers, or even targeting an airstrike or other form of artillery fire. However, a player will not be able to just freely use these abilities during combat. Activating a card will require the player to first capture strategic resources during battle, usually advantageous positions such as control rooms, elevated firing positions, or choke points. The more of these advantageous positions the player captures, the more tactical cards they'll be able to play. Honestly, this makes it sound like battles will be a pretty active affair. Even without the granularity of a time unit system, the player will still have to deal with not only controlling their soldiers, but both interrupting and reacting to enemy units, while also taking advantage of, or suffering the disadvantages of, the will point system, the hit location system, the stealth system, and the tactical card system. It's hard to imagine how they're going to fit all of this into a single game, but fortunately the folks at Snapshot Games are hard at work on a video that will showcase their current vision for the combat system. There's no hard release date on exactly when we might get to see this video, but the current plan is to have it released before the end of the ongoing crowdfunding campaign. So for now, this is RetconRaider signing off. Thanks for listening. And remember, I do love talking about Phoenix Point, but if you want to keep up with the latest news about this great-looking strategy game, then be sure to visit the official website and the crowdfunding campaign on Fig. Links are in the description.